I guess my watch says it's about time to start. So the small but select company present are the ones who have come along to find out about the independent stream. And I'm told that this gets recorded and the slides will be available so lots of people can catch up on it later. So I'm Neville Brownlee, I'm the Independent Submissions Editor. And I've been the Independent Submissions Editor for quite a long, what seems like a very long time now. But the stream has been through a period where there were lots of submissions coming in, and that was fine, but over the last little while they've sort of fallen off a bit. So it seemed it's high time I put a bit of effort into making sure that people really knew what the stream was all about. So I've put together a slide set. We'll talk a bit about the history of the stream and about the RFC. Or the RFC. I mustn't say series at this point because it wasn't a series in the beginning. All about the history of the RFCs, the independent stream, and I'm using that weird abbreviation, INST, because one of the people who proofread these slides for me said, oh, I don't like IS as an abbreviation for the independent stream. So that's about the stream, how it came about. Like everything else in the weird world of the IETF, there are RFCs which describe how things are supposed to work, 4846, 6548. But getting into the practical side of it, there is the question, what kind of things does the stream actually publish? And we'll look at that in a bit more detail. And then I thought it would be useful for you to know a little more about the actual process, how I make it all work. So that's the agenda slide, if you like. So we start by having a look at the early history of the RFCs, RFC Editor version 1. And these go back a very long time. They go back to the ARPANET project. And in April of 1969, Steve Crocker published the first such document. Gave it a number. Was the first document, naturally, it was RFC 1. And in the early stages of the ARPANET, the RFCs really were requests for comments. They were information about whatever the group was working on, shared among the people working in the group. And it wasn't too long before they realized, well, actually, there's a growing number of these. We need to allocate them numbers, and we need to look after those. And that was the point where John Postel put his hand up and said, oh, I'll do that. And it was a really very small group back then. So he became the keeper of the numbers, and all the documents were allocated numbers. They weren't originally RFCs, they were Internet Engineering Notes, which the ARPANET people used to keep track of what they were doing. But John Postel gave them RFC numbers. And so that was the very beginning. But then, a few years later, in 1986, quite a few years later, actually, in 1986, the IETF got started. So that was the point where the ARPANET had given way a little to the internet, and lots more people were starting to access and use the internet. So the IETF then was set up as a task force in 1986, and back then it reported to the IAB. So the IAB basically appointed the IESG and looked after everything to do with the IETF. And it stayed like that from 86 through to 92. And you can see I've been getting a lot of expert help in rediscovering this early history. From 1992, that's when the IESG structure was well defined, and the IESG started to decide exactly how they were going to handle documents, how they were going to look after the working groups, and so on. And up to that point, the RFC editor existed as a separate entity whose job it was to edit and publish RFCs. So that was, the reality of it was a small team of people at ISI who looked after the RFCs. So from the very beginning until 1998, a little bit later still, John Postel was the editor. So whenever the ISG said, right, this document is ready to go, John would take it, look at it, and do whatever needed in the way of editing, and go ahead and publish it, put it up on the website. And that's one of the things which distinguishes the RFCs and the IETF from many other standards organisations. The RFCs have always been publicly available, free to everyone. Early on, John was assisted by Joyce Reynolds, so she is the other person who everybody thinks of as one of the, as the RFC editor from the beginning. The thing about John, I only ever met him myself once, but everybody says about him, he was a determined person. He believed that the text was the important thing, and making sure that it was clean, easily readable and understandable was the most important thing. So I've summarised that. He exercised strong editorial control. If John didn't like it, it didn't get published, basically. But, well, I'm getting ahead of myself there. So, until the IETF got started, 1986, all the RFCs, a lot of those which were generated inside the IETF, were independent submissions. In other words, anybody who had material they wanted to get out in front of the internet community could send a document to John, and if he liked it, he would publish it. If he didn't like it, well, he wouldn't. And that's coming back to the strong editorial control. So that's the beginnings. I'll put my watch out here where I can keep an eye on the time. So things continued about like that until about the middle of the 2000s. And by that stage, the volume of the number of documents being sent across to the RFC editor got bigger and bigger. So at about that stage, the IAB stepped up to it and basically, well, took over the high-level oversight of the RFCs. And so they set up, well, they took what had been the RFC editor and split it into three parts. The RFC series editor, they said, we need somebody to maintain overall control of the RFCs. We'll have the RFC production centre. Those are the people who actually do the editing and publish the documents. And the IAOC have yet another different idea about what publisher really means. And we'll set up 4 document streams. And what they meant by a document stream was this is an outfit, an organisation, which will produce documents, approve them for publication as RFCs, and pass them to the production centre. So there are 4 of those streams. There's the IETF stream. So the stream manager for that is the IESG. And the working groups produce documents, achieve working group consensus on them, and pass them to the IESG, who get to look at them and say, yes, that's okay, and get published, or maybe they don't. There's the IAB, the Internet Architecture Board. They, from time to time, publish documents which basically record, well, they do a variety of things. They're housekeeping documents which spell out structures for other parts of the IETF, generally. And they are documents which set down the IAB view about particular things. There aren't too many of them. The ones of most interest to us in the RFC world at the moment are the set of documents about the new formats. It's taken us coming on 4 years now to get to that, and with any luck, we will start to see documents appearing in the new formats, maybe not this year, but certainly next year. That's the IAB. Yeah, well, all right, okay. Then there's the IRTF, the Internet Research Task Force. They have a bunch of research groups, and that particular distinction was made clear to me a long time ago now. I was working in a working group, and the ASG decided some of the things that working group is doing are understood well enough to be put into practice, but there's quite a few of them which really are not well enough to find. We see those as still being research work, so we're going to push that part of the work into the IRTF. So the IRTF work is divided into a set of different they're research groups, somewhat similar to IETF working groups. The one I'm most familiar with these days is the Cryptography Research Group, which has a very active mailing list. So anyway, when a research group has considered some documents and decided, yes, we would like to see these published as RFCs, then I think there is an IRSG, but essentially the chair of the IRTF, as the stream manager, says, yes, we're going to ask for that to be published, and passes it to the production center. And the last of the streams is the independent stream, which continues to do exactly what John Postel used to do, to provide a venue for anything not covered by the other streams. So in putting these slides together, I had a look through just basically using my favorite search engine to find out about the independent stream, thinking there's got to be some material that's been written down already. And at the time, the transition was made so that the independent stream was set up as a separate stream. Leslie Daigle wrote an article for the Internet Protocol Journal, it was January 2010, talking about the transition of the RFC editor from the way it had been for all those years before into the way it is now. And there were a couple of quotes in that which I thought were worth putting on the slide. One from Bob Hindon, commenting on what the RFC series really is. And if you ask people what they think the RFC series is, you'll get a variety of opinions, from people who think that only the standards documents are important, through to, well, Bob Hindon summed it up. The RFC series is what enables people, vendors particularly, to build products, service providers to build networks, and for the internet really to keep working. And then Sandy Ganosa, who has been editing RFCs for a very long time, way back into the John Postel and Joyce Reynolds days, she had this nice comment talking about the independent stream, something that can offer an alternate view to what happens within the IETF. So things where people believe that they've got something worth saying, along the lines of, well, we tried that and it didn't work, or something that some other group has done something, but here is our idea and we think it's better, that kind of thing. Other people have, of course, written more things down. So if you have a look in our RFC 4846, there's a long list there of different kinds of things which the people who wrote 4846 thought might be reasonable. The other thing about it, well, about the independent stream is it has to have somebody to look after it. That's the independent submissions editor. He does have a job description, which is defined in RFC 6548, and as it happens, I'm an author of 6548, talking about how the stream is supposed to work. So the ISE looks after the independent stream. He's appointed by the IAB, and the quote from 6548, not under the authority or the direction of the series editor, the RSC, or the Series Oversight Committee, RSOC. RSOC is a group of people appointed by the IAB to keep track of what's happening with the production of RFCs and the series in general. But the independent stream is independent of that. So it's directly appointed. The independent stream is directly appointed. It's a part-time volunteer position. At the time when I was originally approached, I was led to believe that there wasn't much work in it, that maybe 2 documents per month would come in. It didn't work out that way. Fortunately, I have a very understanding boss back home. As well, the ISE is allowed, well, may choose to select individuals to participate in an advisory board. So that's the Independent Submissions Editorial Board. What happened there was Bob Braden, who was the RFC editor at the point of the transition, said to me, okay, you're looking after the independent submissions. Here is the list of my current documents. Off you go. Oh, and by the way, I have an editorial board who you can turn to when you need help. And all of the members of that, not quite all, but very nearly all of those people are still with me. So this is a group of people who have been involved, or at least very strongly interested in the RFCs from way, way back. And they are, well, one of the things which I've said quite often over the last 7 years is if I need help, I'll ask for it. Well, they're the people I go to ask for help. So now we can look at the actual process of the stream. 4846 spells out in detail how it's all supposed to work. So now let me think. Do I have to say anything more than this? Oh yes. I've reproduced the abstract from 4846 there because I thought it's quite a nice summary of exactly what the stream is supposed to do. To publish materials that are not rooted in the IETF standards process and its review and approval mechanisms, which is code for saying not under any particular influence by the IESG. Yeah, so I don't think that we need to say more about that. But next question, and this is one which people do tend to ask now and then, just exactly how independent really is the independent stream. Well, the line out of 4846 is they are most valuable if they are completely, in fact, independent of the IETF process. And just to make sure of that, the IESG may tell the independent submissions editor that, oh, we'd really much rather you didn't publish such and such a document, but the independent stream editor is allowed to say, too bad, I'm being published. Well, he mightn't be quite that blunt about it, but he is definitely allowed to go ahead and publish anyway. But in return for that, at the time of 4846 was written, the authors agreed that every document which the ISE was proposing to publish would be submitted to the IESG for a conflict review. So the IESG do get to look at the documents going through the independent stream, and if there are things they don't like, they can write an IESG note, which gets published. It occurs to me that perhaps I could refuse to do that, but I've never done that. Or they may suggest other modifications to the document. And that does mean, as far as the ISE is concerned, well, that's an extra set of eyes who at least take a quick look at every document that goes by. So not all that often. They've got lots of other documents that they're worried about, but from time to time, one or other of the area directors will suggest helpful changes to the document. So they are the last point of review for me, as far as the independent stream is concerned. So the next question, okay, we know what the independent stream is supposed to be all about now. What sort of RFCs can it publish? Well, 4846 is pretty definite about that. The stream can publish informational, experimental, or historic documents. It may certainly not publish anything that looks anything like a standard straight document, because standard straight documents require an IETF community consensus. The IETF is a consensus-driven organisation, so its standards documents reflect that kind of consensus. As compared to that, the independent stream RFCs, they get 2 or 3 or 4 or sometimes 5 reviews, independent reviews, but they don't represent any kind of consensus. So what kind of material works, well, is most suitable for the independent stream? Well, I've listed three categories here. These are, this is my experience of the last few years. The first is work which just doesn't fit within another stream. It's something which didn't, there was no working group interested in it, there was no research group interested in it, and the IAB certainly weren't interested in it. Okay, then it's a candidate for the independent stream. And some examples of things like that, well, I published a document about Edurome, and as far as I know, it's the only published documentation of Edurome and how it works a few years back. And then, so that's one nice example. Then there are vendor-developed systems, and the one that comes to mind is EIGRP. That's a Cisco specific routing protocol. Cisco have been putting it in their routers for as long as I can remember, certainly back into the early 90s. But it was documented. There were 1 or 2 academic articles about it, but there was no other real documentation. Everybody just used it, and it just worked. So I had a rather long document spelling out in great detail exactly how it worked, and that was a nice candidate for the independent stream. It's a bit late now for people to be doing independent implementations of EIGRP, but should they want to, now they can. And there are quite a number of other vendor-specific systems where I've published documents so that other people can implement it and use it. Then there are historic documents. And I have one really good example there. Somebody who sent me the original ARPANET IMP manual. You'll have to look that one up on Wikipedia if you want to know more about that. But he had taken the trouble to take the original paper copy, which he had, and turn it into an internet draft. And so there is a truly historic document, nicely sitting within the independent stream. So that's the not in doesn't fit in another stream class. The next one is work which might well fit into one of the other streams, but that stream doesn't want it. So this is a situation where a bunch of authors have tried to get their ideas to take hold in an IETF working group. And the working group chairs have said, look, we're terribly sorry, but we've got so much that we're trying to get through, we are not going to pick up on your document for whatever reason. One of the reasons is, well, the only reason why they wanted to get an RFC published was to support a request to IANA for a code point in some specification required registry. And there are quite a lot of those documents that have gone through the independent stream in the last 7 years. Some of them can actually be quite tricky because, well, because I have to take their requests to IANA and work out exactly what it is that's needed. IANA has to find an expert to, a subject expert to review that request and so on, so that can be quite tricky. But it's something which doesn't need an IETF consensus, so it can go through the independent stream. Oh, I see I've jumped the gun on the bottom bullet there. Not adopted in a working group, but is already deployed out in the internet and being used, widely used. So an example of that was the document about DMARC for email handling, which was sent in to me by a group of big email providers. Technology certainly hadn't been developed in a working group, but it's out there, it's widely used. So if it's documented in an RFC, other people can implement it and use it. Now, what about is going on with other things? These ones are the categories from 48, 46. Hang on, that's better. These are the ones, 48, 46. And the outer level bullets are from 48, 46. Critical reviews of IETF or other technical work. Well, as an example of that, I had a submission which was documenting the discussions inside a working group where they'd been developing a particular protocol. My reviewers said, well, it's good and it deserves to be published. It would have been even better if they'd gone on to discuss the other parts which were developed after that particular standard was published, but never mind. Now the key to this one is technical work. If it's not technical, if it's just commenting on IETF processes particularly, then it has to be something which the ISE considers really important if it's going to be published as an RFC. In 7 years, there's only been one of those. The other possibility, or the next possibility, republication of standards developed by other bodies. Now, we have done that from time to time, but not within my time as ISE. And 48, 46 has still other possibilities. And even then, the list is not at all exhaustive. The bottom line is, if the ISE wants to publish it, considers it worth publishing, then it can be. But there's one item in that list which I thought was interesting. It includes eulogies. And there's a reference there to RFC 2441, John Costello. John died very unexpectedly in 1998. It was a big loss to everybody in the RFC and the IETF community. So that particular RFC is a really nice eulogy to him, and it gives you a very good idea of what kind of a person he was and how great he was to work with. Now, moving on from history at last. So you're going to submit an independent stream, a document to the independent stream. Well, what are the minimal requirements? Okay. Well, it has to be, I've already said it can be almost anything, but logically it should be a technology-related topic. And that's better if it's well supported by the authors being able to say, we know of several implementations of this and we know that it's out there being used. I do get submissions of people who are dreaming up wonderful new things, but certainly not publishing any more ideas of how to improve IP version 4, for example. So, existing implementations and some deployment are both really good things to support a submission. Next, the topic has to be something that would not be something which was more suitable elsewhere. So the other places where it might be published, well, any other standards organisation like W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, BBF, the Broadband Forum, and there are lots more. Next thing, it shouldn't read like a standard, which means it's not really can't use words like must in capital letters in 2119. The independent stream doesn't publish standards track documents, so the RFCs from the stream shouldn't read like standards. Has to be reasonable technical quality. Yes? Sure? No, this is not a formal session. Go ahead. Well, the bullet on the slide only says should not read like a standard, so that's not a showstopper. Oh. Well, send it in and I'll have a look at it. I don't think so, but send it in and we'll think about it. From other. You, congratulations. Well, I guess that's what we mean. Yes, yes. It should not try to look like an IETF standard. Yes, exactly. All right, and the bottom line is the IEC has editorial decision, can and does just say no. The Independent Stream has its own boilerplate for RFCs. As an example, have a look at 7593, which is the EduRoam one. That's an easier place to find it than anywhere else. This may be a problem if you thought you were looking for some IPR protection from it being an RFC. Well, it doesn't have if it's coming from the independent stream. If you have worries about your intellectual property, then you need to post it as an internet draft. And if you do that, then you can make an IPR declaration, and that's about as much as the IETF can do for you. And remember, none of us are lawyers. But, well, having said that, the IETF IPR policy does apply to the internet drafts, and usually independent submissions are posted as internet drafts. So if you're worried about that, then that's what you do. To actually make a submission, you post your document as an internet draft, and there's, well, that's the URL for posting, finding out about internet drafts. And then the next URL, the second one there, points you to the page, the RFC editor page, which gives you the instructions for submitting. So you check to see that you've got everything in your email, which that page asks you for, and then you send it to rfcise@rfceditor.org. And the kind of information which you need to support the submission, I think I'm going to skip through these next few slides fairly quickly. I need to know the file name of your draft. I need to know what status it's going to be before I have to actually look at it and read the draft. And I need to know whether this document has been discussed in a working group or on a mailing list or anything like that. I need to know that partly so I understand its background and partly because it gives me clues as to who I might be able to approach to review that document. Then, if you're asking for IANA code points, I need to know that this draft is one which doesn't require IETF consensus or standards action. And there's a doc 5226 tells you about that. Specification required are the kind of IANA code points which the stream can handle. Statement of purpose of publishing the document. Why do you think this document should be published? Just having it as an RFC isn't a good reason. We need to know what sort of audience you're aiming at and who you hope will read it. And the page asks for suggestions of competent, independent potential reviewers for the document. Now, the ISE can and will find reviewers, but if you can give me a few names to start with, that's very helpful. I don't know everything myself. That's assuming, of course, that I decide to go ahead with the document. But given that I accept it into the stream, then I have to go out and find at least 2 reviewers. I can ask almost anybody, including the IETF leadership, so I can ask area directors, I can ask working group chairs, and when I do, the request is tactfully set as, could you review this, or better, or otherwise, can you suggest likely reviewers? So it hasn't been that impossibly hard to find reviewers for documents. I normally ask them to just give me a brief heads up on, do you think this is a worthwhile document or not? So if they look at it and they think, oh gosh, not another like that, they can tell me that and not waste any more of their time or mine. It just means I have to go on looking for other reviewers. But if they accept it, then I ask them to get a review back to me inside 3 weeks. And after about 2.5 weeks, I send them a plotting email and we go on from there. But everybody involved in the IETF is busy with their day jobs. So 3 weeks, many of them are pretty good about it, but sometimes it takes longer. And if they can't do it, then I ask them for other reviews. And the last point of reviewing, ISG get to do a conflict review, a RFC 5742 review. We'll get on to that shortly. People who haven't written reviews for me before ask, what should the review look like? What's involved in doing this? So I wrote down some guidelines for them. So the first one is it technically sound? Does it look as though it could be implemented? If the reviewer can see things which need to be changed, or which would cause problems were implemented and deployed, then we need to know about it so the authors can sort those out. So this is very like what happens with comments in a working group. If this particular document is describing a protocol, then same question as the working group, is there enough detail to let somebody else implement this from the text? And this is going back to John Postel. An example code for it is not enough. Sometimes that's all there is, and sometimes, well, never mind, let's not go any further. You have to be able to implement it from the text. And are all of the required sections of the draft there like they're supposed to be? So there has to be an IANA consideration section, which either says nothing is required or spells out what is required. There has to be security considerations, because without those, it just can't go any further. So when the ISE has got some reviews back, he sends copies of those to the draft authors. He may also send suggestions and request improvements to be made before we can get any further with the draft. And as well as that, unlike a paper being submitted to an academic journal where you don't know who the reviewer is, most reviewers are perfectly happy to swap emails and help the authors make the changes, so that we get everything in really good shape before trying to go any further. So when the authors have made the changes and the reviewers and the ISE are happy that the document is ready to go further, then last phase, last hurdle to jump, the ISE asks the IESG for their conflict review, 5742. Now, early on, nobody was clear exactly what information the IESG would like to see. So I simply sent them a note to say, well, here's the draft, here's the abstract of it so that you can see what it's about. This is a list of the people who reviewed it for me, and they and I agreed that it's fine. Over to you. And they came back to say, oh, but we're not quite sure that we trust those reviewers, or we don't know those reviewers particularly. We're generally not happy. We need more information. So I've reached the point now of writing things up for them. So I give them the abstract, a brief history of where the draft came from, and how it was developed. Comments, if any are needed, on what the IANA considerations or security considerations might be, a list of the reviewers, and copies of their reviews, usually. Now that's because 4846 says that reviews will be published. So that's part of the IETF community, that everything is done in public. For this independent stream, there doesn't have to be consensus, but the reviews are published, usually with the reviewers' names. But if you are reviewing, and this does happen sometimes where it happens where people working in a company have said, look, my boss says, please make this an anonymous review. Well, we can do that. But, well, that's how it works. Right, so when everything is set, the ISE sends it to the IESG. They have a look at the draft, 5742. They may have questions, in which case they will swap email with the ISE or with the authors. And this is the point that they may pick up on things which perhaps the reviewers missed, or they may think of things, little changes which would improve it. That's fine. And then they send back to the ISE a recommendation. I love this. And by the way, the Independent Submissions Editorial Board were very, very helpful in reviewing these slides through about 6 iterations to get all of this spelled out clearly. So the IESG send a recommendation. They may make review-like comments, that's the helpful hints or helpful suggestions to the authors, or textual suggestions, which is the IESG note, to the ISE. So then the ISE has to do something. If the ISG had comments which would improve the draft, then I will ask the authors to make those changes, publish a new revision of the draft, which I will then pass to the production centre to be published. And once I am happy that everything is done as it should be, then I can pass it to the production centre. And when that happens, I'll send you a note to tell you that, and you can follow it through the RFC editor queue. Or, I'm just puzzled here. Oh, yes, okay. The things which the ISG are allowed to say, 4846 gives them a list of possible responses to a conflict review. They can say, okay, no problems. They can say, overlaps the work of such and such a working group, but still not a problem. Those two are just fine. They can say essentially they can say, we're worried that this will break the internet, please don't publish, which is a recommendation to the ISE. So in that case, the ISE is sort of put into the crosshairs and has to decide, am I going to publish this anyway, because I certainly can, or not. And this is, well, the history of the last 7 years is I've only ever, twice I have gone ahead and published a document which the ISG said don't. So it is possible. It does happen. It doesn't happen very often, and it has to be something which is quite important, and especially something which is widely deployed and used already before the ISE will do that. But it is possible. It can happen. I thought it would be useful to write down a timeline. One of the editorial board members pointed out that this is the optimistic best case. If everything really goes the way we would hope, well, the submission comes in, it takes a week or so to find reviewers and get them committed to producing new reviews. They've got 3 weeks then in which they're expected to send the reviews in. Then the authors get to make whatever changes were needed. So that's another 2 weeks or so. Then I send it to the ISG. The ISG meets and they have telechats every 2 weeks. So they regard 4 weeks as the normal time to go through the conflict review, provided no problems come up along the way. So the total of all of that is 10 weeks, and that's the point where I would send the draft to the production centre. And just do remember that the ISA may ask for revisions at any point along the way. So it may be a near perfect draft which doesn't need revisions and goes right through pretty much unchanged, or it may be one where the authors have had to spend quite a lot of time swapping email with reviewers to finally get it right. So they may go through half a dozen further revisions at that stage. Now this slide, another one of the people, well, the editorial board people said it'd be good to see some statistics for the, what goes through the independent stream. So I've looked back through the last few years and picked a year. These weren't the really big number years, but it's a couple of years back. 2015, March 2015 through to March 2016. In that year, I had 93 drafts which I had worked on during the year. Of those, at the bottom of the slide there, 39 was still in my active list at the end in March 2016. 21 of them were waiting for reviewers or looking for reviewers or waiting for reviews. 18 of them were waiting on authors' revisions. And I'll comment, some authors, once they've got the process started, lose interest and just go away. So after I've sent them a couple of reminders to say, are you still interested? I decide they're not interested and take it out of the list. Yes, those are ones, yes, otherwise they'd have been handled and finished. So the ones that were finished, 22 of them were published, so that's 22 in a year, and actually that's about what I was originally led to believe would go through the stream. But those are the ones which were successfully published. Of the others, 2 of them were moved to the independent stream, moved to the IETF stream. So these were ones where I and the various reviewers said, look, this should be a working group document. And so I managed to persuade an area director or a working group chair to pick it up and take it over. So that worked. Yeah. And 19 were withdrawn by authors, which is my polite way of saying lost interest and went away. And 11 were just plain outright rejected. So the RFC editor name for that is DNP, do not publish. So there's quite a lot of material that goes through the stream, one way or another. And you can see the fact that you sent it to me doesn't, the odds aren't all that high for it being actually published, but I do my best to push it to where I think it would be best handled. And I think, yes, there's pretty good understanding about that right through. Now, I couldn't resist a slide about myths of the independent stream. Don't get the idea that taking a document through the independent stream will be faster than getting it through a working group. Of course, those of you who are actively involved with working groups know that even from the time you finally manage to get it on the list of working group documents, it can still be a couple of years by the time it gets through. And maybe the independent stream can do better than that. Well, 10 weeks was the optimistic best case. So it is possible, but it doesn't happen like that very often. And the other thing, which really is rather important, not just funny, is that you can't use the independent stream. Oh, I realise I've not changed these 2 acronyms. Oops. It can be used to make an end run around the working group. No, it really can't. We're awake to that idea. The ISE does take the trouble to check, to say, would this be better in some particular working group, and then ask the chairs, have you seen this? Do you think it would be better in the working group? And if that is the case, then I will come back and say, look, this really needs to go to a working group. Last slide. April 1st RFCs. Now, this is a tradition with the RFC editor. John Postel did this from way, way back. They don't really exist. So don't publish them as an don't post them as internet drafts. Send them directly to me or to the RFC editor. The RFC editor, that is the series editor, myself, and some of the RFC editors, look at them, work out, are any of these good enough to be actually published? And we'll pick a few and publish them. If that's going to happen, then they have to be, bearing in mind that the thing about the April 1st drafts is they're the only time-critical drafts. They have to be published on the 1st of April, otherwise that wouldn't be April 1st drafts, which means they have to be reviewed and edited. So you have to get them to the RFC editor or me by not too far into March. Worst case, the middle of March. So these are the only ones that really go through very quickly. But anyway, and we get something of the order of perhaps half a dozen, maybe 8 submissions. Some of them are just dreadful. to be, while I'm standing here raising my hands around, to be accepted as an April 1st draft, John Postel and Bob Braden both said you should be able to, people should read it to at least the end of the second page before they realise it's a split. Going back to avian carriers and evil bit, and the one, my favourite, faster than light communication, and yes, the equations tell you that TCP will still work when we have faster than light communications. Technically, great. But the bottom line is they've got to be funny. They've got to appeal to people with a technical background who will see them as funny. So last year there weren't any like that, so we didn't publish any April 1st IFCs. As a result, we had a rather better, higher number of submissions this year. So look out for this year's April 1st IFCs. And, oh yes, this one really is the last slide. How to contact the IAC? Well, you can email me, that's the email address, ifciac@rfceditor.org. And one of the things that I do is to do office hours during IETF meetings. So if you want to come and talk about a particular draft which you're interested in trying to publish, or if you want to find out where in my process your draft is at the moment, I'm sitting at the desk, the RFC editor desk, on Wednesday morning or on Thursday afternoon. That really is, oh no, it's not quite. Message from the Secretariat. They would like to know how you thought this tutorial was. Did you find it interesting? Did you find it useful? What could we have done better? So they put up a SurveyMonkey survey at that URL. Do please take a few minutes. It's quite a short thing. I wouldn't think it'll take more than 5 minutes to answer, but we need the feedback. So take a look at it and do fill it in. But right now, are there any other questions? In which case, if there aren't, I'll say thank you for coming. I'm delighted to have a reasonable audience to talk to. And I'll be on the desk on Wednesday morning if you need to talk more.